So I'm Catherine Lambert. I'm with the Highland Park Historical Society, at least tonight. 2 nights ago, I was with the Illinois Mycological Association. I just change hats and change whatever every night. Tonight's program is related to the Lake County History Symposium, which was in January. And I kind of like to get a little more work or a little bit for the effort we put into doing the research. I don't want it just to be a singular event. So tonight we're going to see what Highland Park's contribution was. Jeff is going to talk about something that was quite surprising. And when it came up, like at a meeting maybe about a year ago, it's like, this deserves some attention. But what he's going to talk about is rather brief, it's compact, but it's an interesting look at how you need to sometimes look again when you're doing something. But anyway, this is from Jeff Stern.
Even historians don't always get it right the first time. Few of us question information we find in historic texts that we know are not politically influenced. The location of a particular structure in a relatively small community would seem to fit that non-controversial category, especially if it has been referenced in a number of publications long after being first mentioned. We assume that the material would have been appropriately researched and accepted as fact. Why would we not? Right into the 21st century, periodicals and at least one book cited the location of Highland Park's 19th century Gray Electric Company factory as being on Beech Street at St. John's Avenue. Inventor Elisha Gray had come to Highland Park in 1871 and built a home on Hazel Avenue. He also bought nearby property and was said to have built a manufacturing plant on St. John's at Beech Street. But is that where it actually was? As the city's 150th anniversary approached in 2019, the Highland Park Historical Society commemorated the occasion with a pictorial tribute to William W. Boyington at the downtown Highland Park Metro Station. A renowned architect who became one of the city's early mayors, Boyington designed Gray's plant, and a photo of it was included in the station plaque. But something about the photo led an Historical Society board member to take another look at the plant's history. The north side of Beech Street, east of St. John's, where Gray's plant was said to have been, had long been associated with homes for aged and disabled railroad men, and early 20th century property plats showed the area had been almost entirely residential. In 1910, a new building with rooms for over 100 former railroad men, later known as Villa St. Cyril, was opened on that same property. So where really was Gray's plant? Close examination of the photo of the factory shows the shadows of trees on what would have to have been the north side of the plant if it really was along Beech Street facing St. John's. Yet, no matter what the time of day, it would be hard to find a building in Highland Park with sunlight on its north side. Some photos also show tracks in the foreground with no street between them and the plant. So what happened to St. John's? It would have to be concluded that shadows on the building were caused by afternoon sunlight from the southwest, indicating that the building was on the west side of the tracks facing east. This determination could be supported by a 1909 map which identified some 50 acres of property west of the railroad tracks in that area as being owned by the Gray Electric Company, where homes for its workers had also been built. A co-founder of the Western Electric Company, Gray died in 1901, meaning he could only have operated his factory for less than 10 years, since it was still in the planning stage as late as 1891. The empty shell of the plant burned in a fire in 1908. The next year, the property it stood on was sold to a developer who built more houses on the site. The Historical Society initially accepted the earlier version of the plant's location. It was only after new light was shed on the subject that a different concept emerged.
So Jeff, what inspired your thinking about all this?
Well, for one thing, in the building we lived in here in the condo, our breakfast table faces north. So anyway, I was noticing that the sun itself never came in that window on the north side of our building. So thinking again about the plaque that we'd put up for Boyington, I began to wonder what really was going on here. And again, looking at those shadows on the side of the building of the gray plant and seeing this, obviously the sun was on that side of the building, so it couldn't have been the north side. And so and then when I saw the tracks at the bottom of the picture, which I had not seen before, I realized that, hey, there's no street in between the tracks and the building. So this can't be the east side of the tracks. It has to be the west side. And so that's why I came to the conclusion that that it never was, that building never was on the east side of the tracks. Also because those railway men's homes were on that same, would have been on that same property, which would have made it pretty, a pretty busy property. And right up until 1910, when the new building was built for the railroad men, which later became St. Cyril, of course. So I came to that conclusion that somebody was made a mistake early on, and it just was the wrong information. Again, there was nobody around to contest that, because the original gray plant had burned in a fire in 1908. So when this information was coming out, there was nobody who would say, well, I remember this or I remember that. No, there was nobody around to contest that theory that the building had ever been on the east side of the tracks.
Now, this is, Richard asks, what is the building on the north side of Gray Avenue at the railroad tracks? I thought that was a part of the Gray business. And Jeff, you and I drove there and looked at that location.
Yes, it could have been part of that plant because it wasn't residential. That structure wasn't built as a residential building. So it could have been part of that plant, but I don't know which part. I couldn't tell which part. It was just it's a small building. It looks like a garage.
It does, but it also, I mean, it also could have been a piece that was moved to that location, or maybe there was another small business there that it was serving the Gray factory.
That's possible. And of course, the street that it runs into is called Gray Avenue.
Right.
So
yeah, we drove there during the winter. Well, it's still winter, but a couple of months ago, we drove by there wondering the same thing ourselves. Because did you, and I don't think you did, but this misinformation about this location is going back to, and maybe Nancy, you have some speculation on it, but that goes back to probably what, the 40s perhaps, or earlier?
I did do some research with Jeff on this, and I found a varied pattern going back as far as the 40s, where it was mentioned it was across, specifically stated in newspapers, Beech and St. John's. Every once in a while it'll be correct, but most of the time the line, continued.
Right, and it's nobody's. I mean, I even remember driving by there and going, "Huh, that's where it was." little tight, but you know, wow. And now the Villa St. Cyril has been gone for over what 20, maybe approaching 30 years now. Yeah, it was strange. Any other questions or comments? And I think part of this was also set off by somebody from the preservation committee who wanted to know, you know, verification of some information on a pamphlet they wanted to issue. So it was really an impressive piece of correcting an error.
Well, it's never
Okay.
too late. It's never too late. And again, since the original building burned in 1908, you know, and again, there were a few people who were, you know, around to question, you know, where it really was. And as I said, Gray himself, having died in 1901, and he only had a few years with that factory there, where it was. And so again, few people were again around to contest that issue of exactly where it was.
You know, and I think the other issue is, I think from a city planning point of view, I think we're not unhappy that that is no longer an area of light industry or whatever they were doing. You know, it's residential, and
Yeah.
I think from a long-term point of view, it was a good thing. Though I did hear, and I think Nancy, it was you that told me that there were considerations of turning it into a hotel.
I did find some articles shortly before the fire that there was discussion about, you know, turning them into a hotel, and there'd been plans set apart for that. But the fire took care of that plan.
It sure did. So we'll move on to the next element, which is Nancy's discussion on the log cabin project. There used to be more than just Stoopy Cabin on the front lawn of the city.
So when I saw the subject matter for this year's, I have to move this, for this year's symposium in Lake County, the built environment, architecture and landscapes in Lake County, I thought, because, you know, of course, long before European settlers came here, the glaciation was here, the rain, there were woodland Native Americans lived here, the Potawatomi were pushed here by initial settlement. And then we had a first wave of pioneer settlers in the mid 19th century. And we do have the Stoopy Cabin remaining, and there's some families that are still in town, of course, that names we see frequently. But right before the Historical Society moved, a gentleman named Mr. Joe Pearson came by. I'm going to stop the share and fix it and keep talking. So he had a CD, and he said he had these pictures that were taken by the North Shore Daughters of the American Revolution of cabins that were still standing at the end of the 19th century in Highland Park. Now, this is not the Daughters of the American Revolution is in North Shore. It was founded by Highland Park women, and there's all these cabins and many names I hadn't seen before, but of course they lived here because, so I accepted. I said, thank you very much. And he had, whenever he had scanned these, he got these, he said, from a member of the group that he did high resolution tips, which is really a big favor for us. And I'm sorry, my computer's not behaved. This has not happened to me before. So that was good because that, I mean, he really did high quality scans. So I've never seen the originals. And can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because my computer's giving me weird things, but I'm talking as I'm going. And so we had these things like the Lamb family and the Dawson family and the Martin family. Of course, the Mclaren family I recognize because we have Mcraryn Street, and Goldberg family. So I decided to do that for our project and talk about what was here with the first wave of settlers. So I decided to compare what it looked like when the farms were there and what they look like now. Now, the Daughters of the American Revolution was an interesting organization because, of course, it's based on genealogy, and you have to be descended from revolution people, blah, 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 blah. But what they did, and they've kind of, in the way, as they continued, have evolved, and they've done some not good things too, they did have a keen interest in preservation of local history. And so you see plaques and other things they come up with, and they did plaques around Indian trail trees. They did plaques, the tree by the hospital, and that big American flag on Central Avenue. They are responsible for that. So just by chance, it seems that some of the groups that I picked out for visual reasons are Irish families. So you get some of the things that the DAR, the North Shore, did around town. There was this culturally modified tree across from Braeside Station. That's a postcard. The plaque has disappeared, but this postcard from 22. In 1932, they put a tree in front of the hospital. In 1925, they added a new flag, and that's Mrs. Phelps and Mayor Hastings dedicating that flagpole on Central Avenue in 1925. But it didn't always look like that. So this is Exmoor, of course, but that's where Stoopy Cabin was, and that's where the Stoopy Farm was. And as well, the Rechtenwald family, which is Margarita's family. So this is a map. We have two maps here. This is from 1880s. This is digitized, available on the Library of Congress, but we have the print copy here, and you can see some of the farms. I'm going to highlight the Lambs. We have the Stoopys here. You have the Mccrarens, the Martins, and this is where their farms were. And if you look to the more recent map, you can, it's kind of here, 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 all west. Now, Highland Park itself, when these farmers, this is 4 times larger now than it was previously. It's expanded. This is pretty much all Highland Park now. You still have Highwood and Lake Forest, a little bit of Bangkok Burn here. And here's some people out on the lawn in Exmoor when the Stoopy Cabin was still there, looking very different, I'm sure, than the farmers had it when they were there, the Rechtenwalds. So so we know that now Hibernia, the Fagan family, they were a family from Ireland. I don't think there's any Fagan families still here, but this little house was still standing at the end of the 19th century. Someone was still living in it. And this is kind of in the area where Hibernia is now. If you're familiar with Hibernia here, that's a picture, very different now. Another family, this is the Lamb family. The Lamb family was another Irish American family. And this is the farmhouse they built in 1920. They had a milk farm, and one of the daughters married, and that was Mary O'Connor, and that's part of a larger Highland Park family, but they had the dairy farm into the mid 20th century, and the house was still standing there. And this picture was taken a few years ago. The most recent is like 2800 Skokie. I found an ad for it on loop.net. It was a swimwear distributor, and now it's for sale, if it's not knocked down already, to become a storage shed area, because it's several acres where the farm was previously. Now, Mrs. Lamb, Bridget, was a member of the Dawson family. And this is actually Bangkok Burn. And we have to recall here that this is the North Shore Daughters of the American Revolution. And they were documenting the area. That's why it's more expansive outside of just Highland Park. And this is about where the farm would have been northwest of Telegraph and Half Day Road. Interesting about these images, of course, not the original, the copies. I did find even more copies in the library drawers, and the notations on the back are all quite varied. So I had to use, so one thing I like to do here is stimulate research. I want people to get online and look at our resources online in the library and see what they tell us about Highland Park as it grew. So this is, the Dawson was a poultry farm. Now, also we had the Martins. The Martins were from Bavaria. And again, none of these families I've discussed now, as far as I know, have descendants still in Highland Park, even at kind of quickly looked at the daughters, and exception maybe O'Connor's, they are not still here. They moved to Chicago, they moved out west. The Martins were from a very large family. Most of the kids seem to have moved more to Chicago and married, and Winnetka and his. And this was developed into a subdivision by a Nixon group, which you'll see frequently if you look at Highland Park newspapers. Nixon was a Chicago area developer. He developed actually the area that was the Dawson poultry farm. For a while, he used the Dawson and Lamb family buildings as garages and children's playhouses in 1925, according to the news. But eventually they gave way to developments at various stages. In the 20s, there's lots of development, Highland Park Gardens, Woodlands, Ravinia Gardens, of course, stalled with the repression, restarting post-World War II. And then at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, you have a lot of tear downs and replacements of this. Is one of the earlier Nixon homes.
Nancy,
Yes.
have you ever done any research into that name, Lamb? It seems to me there were funeral homes named Lamb in Chicago, run by a family, Lamb. Yeah.
I did do some research. Daniel and Bridget had 4 children, 3 never married. They just lived at the farm, working out their years at the farm till they died. One daughter, Mary became an O'Connor, and one of her daughters became a nun. So, and 2 kids married. So I don't think it's the same Lamb family, unless it's a distant cousin.
All right, that's all. Yeah.
So this is the Mclaren family, and this is Martin family. This is the barn. And when these pictures were taken in the late 19th century, people were still living in them, according to the notes on the back. But the DAR had this proposition. They were trying to document American history, their young country, and they went around and took all these pictures of family. The Mclaren families are still Mclarens in town. We're another Irish family. And of course, we have Mclaren Road. The Mclarens rebuilt a farmhouse in the early 20th century, which no longer survives earlier. I thought I'd bring one, and I could not find. I did try and find pictures. And in our collections, we don't have pictures of most of these people. They stayed for 2 generations, maybe 2.5, and left. But this is Thomas Mclaren, who came from Ireland and had quite a large farm. In fact, he's described in 1898 as being very successful. And one thing I noted with all these researches, with all these families, is how non-linear so many of these trips were. People didn't just come from Ireland or Bavaria or Baden or Luxembourg, as the most part, and just plop in Highland Park. They worked here, and they worked in Quebec, and then they worked in Tennessee, a very circular route, before they ended up where they might have ended up. In this fact, there's cousins. The Mooneys and Mcrarens were cousins from Ireland. And so I found that that there's a lot of traveling. John Finney, another Irish who came here later, is an example of his family was first in Pennsylvania and New York before they ended up in Lake County. So that's about the area where the Mclaren farm was, is this building here, which is after several generations of homes. And this is the kind of notes that were on the back of these images that Mr. Pearson digitized, and it tells you, says, you know, Mclaren, Thomas, maybe. I verified that with other information location over the field north of the woods from Highland Park to Deerfield west of the Chicago. And keep in mind, when these pictures were taken, there were 2 railways, an electric and a steam train. So some of the Mclaren family still live in the Deerfield Road, I think just before you get to the Mooney Cemetery. So I really hope people will look online and use our catalog and look at these pictures and look at the stories and find out more about Highland Park. We have an exhibit in Stoopy Gardens with the poster and with some of these maps and houses, and the funding for the artwork that was done. I have to say, I'm not an artist. I can't even color between the lines. So I'm very happy that when we did the poster, which was the whole purpose for going forward for the exhibit, that our graphic designer designed it. And I let him pick out which cabins. It was not based on which cabins we wanted to talk about. I said, what looks the best? And he picked, the Seagulls were from Baden. So there you go. The poor Fagans lived in that little cabin, but also there were other families' tracks. So thank you to Mr. Pearson, who actually passed away shortly after he gave this to us. So thank you. And thank you to Catherine and Jeff Amanda Vasquez, the DAR archivist in Washington, has been helping with our research too. She's done a lot of digitization like us, so the newsletters are online. And Victoria Sabat, one of our volunteers, helped research the Fagan family. So if anyone has any questions, I'm open for questions.
There's some questions in the chat. I'll start with that. Oh, you didn't need to knock it off because maybe there was a question, but we'll find out. Is the Lamb Farm Group home on the same property as the original Lamb family home?
Where's the Lamb Farm? I don't know. No, it's much farther north. The Lamb Farm is on Skokie, north of Ace Hardware was. It's much farther north.
Oh, is that the one that you said is on 41?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I know where it is. I didn't realize that building was going to come down.
Well, I don't know, but I was, when I was looking for it, I tried contacting the man who bought it. He didn't answer me. And there was a swim supply store. The number's busy, but all these
Yeah,
ads.
the pool supply store.
Right, it's actually a company that sells land specifically for storage areas that is the owner now.
Oh, well, then we know what will happen. What family had a farm at Beech and Sheridan on the south side of Beech?
Well, let's have a look. We can bring up that map. I'll share the screen. I also see a question about, are there any remaining Indian trail trees in Highland Park? We don't know for sure there ever was such a thing as an Indian trail tree. We do know that all kinds of people, what we do is formally called a cultural modified tree. And really, we don't know so much about that as much as we'd like to, but we're learning more. I understand there's still a bent tree on Hazel. And since I'm going to share the screen again, and I'm going to show you the map. So even though we have this atlas in our catalog, Library of Congress digitized it. So we're not going to digitize something that is a larger, broader scope. We're going to spend our information. If you search atlas in our catalog, you'll find there's several, but this one, Illustrated Atlas, I've included a link to it at the Library of Congress. You can also come in and look at it. And it's a really, really informative map. One thing, streets have changed, lots of things have changed. What hasn't changed is from the original platting of the counties and the townships. The numbers have largely remained the same, much as far as I can tell. So.
Somebody mentioned the property on the south side of Beech at Sheridan Road. I believe the house that's there now belonged at one time to the Gatzert family out here, because I think that's, at the turn of the century or a little bit later. I think my father used to spend time with Walter Gatzert, who's deceased now. Of course, they're all gone. But anyway, I just happen to be familiar with that house, and that I think belonged to the Gatzert family.
But so looking at the map here, there's several lands. There's the Ludwig family had a farm. I know that. There's a Gallagher farm. The Stipe farm is farther south. That's more where north. What's the country club called? The North something.
Northmore.
Yeah. So thank you. So, but this is still section 26. If you look at the Moraine map, this is still section 26. Section 27, section 28. Here's the Mooney Farm. And this is the Ravinia at this time was a township. It was not part of Highland Park.
Is this by the Mooney Cemetery?
No, the Mooney Cemetery is
because where that cemetery is, the land wasn't considered very good. Wasn't plowable, so it was kind of marshy.
The Mooney Cemetery now is north of Mclaren Road. At the time it was on Green Bay Road. But so as someone asked about trail trees, and I will share, these are the pictures. Jesse Lowe Smith believed in the trail trees, and he took some glass slides of them. And this is the one on Hazel, I believe is still there. I don't know if it is or not. There was one in Ravinia. This is the county line when I mentioned the Daughters of American Revolution, put their little plaque there. Where is the Mclaren? The Mclaren farm was closer to Deerfield Road, really not too far off of Deerfield Road. In fact, when they built the new farmhouse, the address was on Deerfield Road. But remember, the highway was not there. It was just a Skokie Road.
Now, do you think you have all of the images? Or do you think there could be potentially some missing images from this
Oh, I
survey?
I don't know. I do not, the DAR, archivist in DC, and I both tried to search for more about this project. We found general information about these preservation projects that were part of the troika of the DR, including historic preservation. And we did not find anything specific to this project. We don't know who the photographer is. I've never seen the originals. I only have that CD that Mr. Pearson dropped off, and then the not terribly good copies on very cheap paper that the library had in a drawer that had completely different notes and much fewer copies than what was on the back of the copies I was given. And I put them again, I put them all online. I also put online the verso of the pictures, so you can see and people can do, as archivist, I want other people, I don't want to be the person who's always doing the research. And this is and you can see the Carolans, the Lambs, the Martin, Yor, which is very far north, almost probably back Baconburn, Fagan, the Burris family, which is also west Deerfield, not too far from the Mcrarens. But and which I transcribed exactly what they said on the back of them. So you can see this is the poultry farm, the Dawsons, and Bridget Lamb was a Dawson. John Dawson's and the family used both spellings on the road from Highwood to Half Daw, which I think that's Half Day, west of Telegraph Road. So then we matched them up. And then they often, just like the Stoopy cabin survived, they kept the cabin for whatever, for the children, for storage, for an out, so that they had it available. Sweeney's, of course, was just west of Fort Sheridan, but there was still some buildings there when this picture was taken. But you can see, this is the information we started working with. The graphic artist complained to me that the pictures were not very sharp, but I said I was so very happy just to have that. Joe Pearson did take high resolution TIFFs, which is a stable format that we could have those and take care of those and save those.
Yeah, just not a good enough picture. But frankly, it's astonishing that the picture's as good as it is, isn't it?
Actually, it is. And it is. Joe also told me that someone had them in their basement someplace in Lake Forest, but he said he couldn't tell me who it was. So if you are there and you are, just let us know. Give it to the Historical Society here in Highland Park, to Lake Forest, Lake Bluff. We'd love to have them, or DR in Washington, DC would love to have them too. It'd be very helpful. And I really have to commend the North Shore DR for going a little bit beyond their flag waving and taking these pictures and seeing that they were disappearing. These farms were going to disappear.
It was a very thoughtful idea. Because the landscape does change, and this really does document kind of our early settler past. Now, most of these were kind of in the lower lands, right? Like the other side of what we'd say 41 today.
Right. And I think that's because as the land developed, it was pushing westward. So by this time in the 1890s, we think the farms had been pushed west. There were not farms very far, unless just west of the tracks, like there were in the 1870s, 1880s. You still had a cut of farms right there pushing up to what's now First, Second, Green Bay, but the farms were gone. That area developed relatively quickly in the 1870s and 1880s. That's my suspicion. I don't have any documentation, but looking at the maps and hearing the stories about the Mooneys and moving the cemetery, that's, I think, a reliable suspicion or hunch to start with. Any other questions?
But I was talking about, like, were any of these cabins like up in the Highlands, or that region?
Absolutely.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in that region where Edith McCormick, she bought a farm.
There was the Sweeneys were up there, and I'm challenging myself now. Some more Irish families. We actually have a picture, another picture. I'm going to share my screen again, but also sometimes the land was owned by speculators. So you'll see like the Stoopies and Rector walls, and other families own various things. This is a couple up what's now the Highlands, and I've seen different names attached to the picture, and this is original glass slide, which you can see is all spotted, but this is a couple just west of Fort Sheridan, right after the building was bought. You see Highland Park, these pictures are taken at Highland Park, look very different. That's actually Central Park. Again, some of these old slides, we were just happy that they were saved, and we have high resolution, we can fix them when we need to be published. But this is the actual high resolution scan of the image.
Yeah, because when we were doing the HP 150 project a few years ago, you had that one early slide of downtown Highland Park.
That is one of my favorites in the collection. It's an enormous slide, by the way. I can show this, and it's the earliest known photo that we have of Highland Park.
But I found online improved versions.
Right, so they printed it and they fixed it up, absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's the actual scan of the slide.
This was the one I'm thinking of, was looking at downtown Highland Park, let's say from west to east. Looking, the railroad tracks were involved.
This one?
That's it. That looks like it. Yep. Yep.
So yeah, and reproductions have been made from the slide that have been really fixed up nicely. And they filled in, but this is the actual original capture.
I
So
remember
also, this is
when.
one of the archivist's favorite pictures. We've got these men sawing down a tree, and again, another enormous slide. So there you go.
Wow. Now, is that from Highland Park as well, or just somewhere?
Yes, it's Highland Park.
Wow. I don't think I want to be the guy on top.
They had guns too. If you look, if you see, look at the actual slide and then look at the high resolution tip, which you don't put in the catalog because it takes up too much space. They had guns. So, any other questions? Any Highland Park question? Well, anytime. You can always call the Historical Society or email the Historical Society or call the library for any historical questions or requests.
Well, Nancy, thank you for your time. Jeff, this was terrific as always. Jeff has a rather interesting he writes articles for the Ravinia Neighbors Association. He's also on the board of the Highland Park Historical Society, and he's also on the board of the Greater Chicago Fire Museum. I hope I got it right for once. But he does a lot of historical reviews of fires, significant fires. And in fact, in case you're interested, but Nancy and Jeff and we've been doing the road show. We did a presentation, well, separately because it's different topics, but at the Illinois History Conference, Nancy talking about the Highland Park Women's Club. And I did a comparison contrast of their cookbooks from 1911 and 1925. And Jeff did the second greatest Chicago fire, the Stockyards Fire of 1934. And somebody of my age is not usually supposed to remember all these things, but I have Jeff who's tutored me on all of this.
And I had a question about Jeff, about the home for the old railroad workers. When was it built, or when was it built?
Well, the earliest ones that I could find in our records was about 1871. Those were actually homes, individual homes that were converted into retirement homes for the aged and disabled railroad men. And that first I could see of it, thanks to Nancy, was about 1871. So the formal building that became St. Cyril didn't come until 1910.
1910. Okay, because I lived on Linden between Cedar and Beech, and I walked to the Beech and St. John's, was where I got the North Shore train to go to high school. That
Yes.
was the stop at Beech Street. So I
And it
saw
was-
that every day. It was a very large building that was all one. It wasn't at that time, wasn't it?
Well, again, 1910, you wouldn't,
It wasn't, I wasn't there in 1910.
I know, but that's when that building that became St. Cyril, that's when that was built, opened, I should say.
Yeah,
So, and you would have gotten off the North Shore at Vine because
Yes.
there was also a station on the North Shore line at Vine
right,
for those students at the high school. Yeah,
right.
that would have been used. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was something, taking the train to, like a bus to school. Okay, I think we're done. We'll see you next month on the 12th of April with Cynthia Clampett talking about the Midwest. All righty,
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you. That was
Thank you
interesting.
for coming.
Thank you.
Yes,
We appreciate you coming.
Okay.
thank you.
Good night.
Good night.